Back at the Leopold residence, they had an unexpected visitor. Duke Periel Carlos, head of a family known to sponsor many artists. He was an acquaintance of Duke Pastelio. He had gotten a letter along with one of Karina's paintings. The Duke had explained about her art disease and had requested of him to find out more since Karina refused to talk about it. That brought him to the Leopold residence. He had requested to see one of Karina's paintings, which confused Count Leopold, because Karina's paintings wasn't outstanding enough to call for the attention from a duke, or so he thought. As the Count handed the paintings over, he said as much, but the Duke disagreed, which surprised the Count. Duke Periel realized that the Count knew nothing about his daughter's ability. He told the Count that Karina had artist's disease. "How so? Karina never had talent from the beginning. You must be mistaken," the Count said, surprised by this news. If she was sick, how could she have left home? He questioned the Duke. The Duke told him that Karina was at Duke Pastelio's residence, and the Count shouted out in shock. "Karina was in the north?" Duke Periel mocked him on his lack of knowledge about his own daughter, and told the Count that Duke Pastelio had sent him here. The Count angrily told the Duke to leave, but before he could, Duke Periel said in an amused tone, "It's amusing that you don't believe that she has the art disease, but you believe she's in the north." As he left, the Duke said in passing that if someone told him that his child was sick, he'd want to know first if his child was okay. The Count kept silent, utterly disgraced because that question had never crossed his mind. As he left, Duke Periel noticed many paintings with missing main subjects. "It might already be too late," he said in a quiet voice. The Count sat at his desk. He heard a knock on the door. Enfric and Nocturne walked in. They greeted the Count with cheerful smiles. Nocturne gave his regular report on Abelia's health and told the Count that she was well enough to take part in banquets and tea parties. The Countess, however, was ill because of sleep deprivation and tiredness. As he left, Nocturne was unsure if he should mention Karina's disease. But word about Karina's disease might reach Abelia, and he didn't want her to worry, so he decided against informing the Count. The Count told Enfric about Duke Carlos's visit, and that Karina was, in fact, in the north with Duke Pastelio. Enfric was surprised. They should go fetch her now, he insisted. But of course they couldn't. The northern borders were closed because of the winter. The Count questioned Enfric about what type of person Duke Pastelio was, but Enfric could find no fault with him. He was the perfect gentleman, and it seemed Karina had taken a liking to him as well. The Count couldn't believe that Karina left because she was infatuated with Duke, or so he believed. He still refused to believe that Karina was actually sick, despite Duke Carlos's words. Karina was so irresponsible and inconsiderate. She couldn't send a single letter while her family sat, riddled with worry. Enfric suggested they talk to Karina when she came back. She might have just had her real thoughts hidden all this time. He truly believed his beloved sister would return. The Count closes his eyes and leaned back as he said tiredly, "Just where did things go wrong?" Back in the north, Karina traveled back with Million and the doctor in tow. "How did you find me?" Karina questioned, curious. The doctor revealed that he found her through a miracle of his own. He explained all he has to do was embroider and think about something he wanted to find. Once he burned his work, it would take shape and reveal the object's whereabouts. He, too, had art disease. He was slowly losing his eyesight. There was no known cure for art disease. When the Duke questioned him about his eyesight, he said sadly that he rarely used his miracle now. Not everyone gets the disease, and those that do usually go about losing one of their senses. Losing one's life is the rarest side effect. Karina's entire body ceased up at the doctor's words, her expression downcast. The Duke was quick to notice but said nothing. Karina suggested they talk about her art disease inside, and the doctor agreed. As they left the carriage, Karina told him how fun their day was. She looked at him with a sweet smile, but with sad eyes. "If it's okay with you, please offer me this opportunity again," she said softly, wistfully. As they walked down the hallway, the doctor asked if the Duke knew about her illness. She stopped and smiled sadly, blue eyes brimming with pain. He knew. She told him it soured the mood to know you're staying with someone that's about to die soon. Karina revealed that she'd planned to leave soon because she didn't want to hurt Million, but he gave her the little warmth she'd never had before. She didn't have the strength to run away just yet. She wanted to stay just a little longer. As they sat, Karina apologized for deceiving the doctor about her identity, but that meant of little importance to the doctor. The doctor wanted to know more about the family doctor. The Leopold doctor was outstanding in medical knowledge. He could have easily diagnosed Karina, but Karina told him about her distrust in the family doctor. She explained sadly that she was never at the center of her own life. She always supported her siblings from behind, always in the shadows while they stood in the light, attention raining down on them. She once sought comfort from her mother after getting scolded for making Peridot cry. She wanted to sleep in her mother's warm embrace, but her mother refused because she was exhausted from comforting Peridot. She was hurt, and her emotions had burst out of her in a shout. "I wished I never had younger siblings," she'd cried out. That was the first time her mother had struck her. She'd angrily said that Karina should have been grateful for being born healthy, always being compared to her younger siblings. She told the doctor she was never looked after, no matter how sick she got. She wasn't going to die from it, so it wasn't something serious. It would pass after a few days. If she ever threw a tantrum, her parents threatened to throw her away in the slums. The doctor grabbed her hand and smiled gently. He told her how well she did enduring for so long, for staying next to those that hurt her. His words brought tears to her eyes. She wasn't used to such kindness. He told her about his own sad past. He was judged for being a man who loved to embroider. His parents wanted him to be a knight, but he refused. He'd only wanted to focus on his embroidery because it brought him such joy. He found out about his miracle the day he burnt his embroidered work at a funeral of someone he knew. He'd lost something before, and through burning those items, was he able to find what he'd lost. After that, he'd help people find items they lost, or he'd catch criminals using his miracle. He'd felt like a hero to the people. But after 20 years of living like that, he started losing his eyesight and he couldn't embroider like he used to. He was diagnosed with art disease. If he continued on as he'd lived, he'd eventually lose his life. But giving up his miracle was like a slow death to him. How could he give it up? On a trip, he found new meaning to his existence, helping the sick. He told her how right her choice was in distancing herself from those who'd hurt her. Facing those who hurt you is the fastest way to heal scars, but also putting distance between them and you is another way to heal those scars. Now you have a healthy mind to create new relationships and memories, he told Karina. He asked her again about the family doctor, and she sheepishly explained how she met Nocturne, the family doctor, her first love. She'd met him while out on a stroll in the garden. She was 17 years old at the time. Meeting him was like the first light in her always dark life. He had a pleasant personality, and he treated her kindly. She'd once eagerly ran to the garden to speak with him, and she caught him while gazing at flowers. He told her with a bright smile how he'd wanted to show her the beautiful blooming flowers. Karina was overjoyed because he wanted to show her something he found beautiful. But it was all a misunderstanding on her side. That was when Karina realized his affection was aimed not at her, but at Abelia. She told the doctor about one incident. Abelia had joined her in the library. As Karina worked near the bookshelf, Abelia complained about how she wanted to go outside, but Nocturne kept her from doing so. He always looked out for Abelia, Karina thought, dejected. She was appalled with herself for being jealous over the affection Nocturne gave Abelia. Abelia suddenly popped out of one of the shelves, and the bookshelf fell towards Karina. It had hit another bookshelf near her and got stuck before it could crush Karina beneath its weight. Nocturne had rushed in and fussed over Abelia. He looked at Karina with furious eyes. "What did you do?" She tried to explain, but he would hear nothing of it. He told her that Abelia was weak, so it was better that the bookshelf had fallen towards her. He flung scornful words at her, like daggers, accusing her of trying to kill Abelia. She told the doctor how Nocturne left with Abelia in his arms while she sat there, injured on the floor. She realized after some time that he wouldn't be returning to help her. She understood then that Nocturne did not care for her, just like the rest of her life. Leah was once again the first priority. If he had known about her disease, he wouldn't have said anything because it might be a shock to Abelia. Meanwhile, Million stood on the other side of the door, listening to their conversation. It wasn't his intention to eavesdrop, but he had overheard her as he walked closer to the room. "Isn't this too much to treat someone this way?" he thought, annoyed. Now he understood why her behavior was like that of a child experiencing new things. Everyone around her was like a huge wall blocking her from any happiness. He smirked. He would bring her countless happy moments from this point onwards. Karina sat, sketching. It was a drawing of the demonic beast that Million had fought on their outing. Her art supplies were running short. She would need to stock up on some more soon. Should she ask Million to buy her some? But she didn't want to use his money. After all, she was a count's daughter. She picked up the heron that sat on the table. She recalls the superstition Million had told her about. She closed her eyes and smiled as she held the heron close to her. How warm it was. Million and Karina had decided to go out. Karina was going for her fitted winter outfits, and Million had decided he'd join her. He couldn't feel her stares from the window last night as he trained, he told her, and the apples of her cheeks reddened at his words. She told him that she went to bed late because she drew well into the night. He asked about her art supplies, but she rushed to say that she has a pencil. Million looked at her quizzically. A pencil? Surely she needed more than a pencil for her art. It was difficult to get high-quality art tools, he said, but if they looked, they would find some decent art supplies. She smiled in consent. Million told her his close friend would be arriving soon. Close friend? She inquired. He explained that he had sent her drawings to Duke Periel, head of the Carlos family. They were known for their interest in talented artists. What? You sent him my paintings? She said in a dismayed voice. As they entered the boutique, he told her that Duke Periel is quite knowledgeable on the art disease, so he would be of help. But his words soared over her because she was still shell-shocked. She told him how embarrassed she was. It was almost as if someone was looking at her diary, her personal thoughts. Million hadn't realized she viewed her drawings in such a personal way and apologized. Just then, a lady came out to greet the Duke. He introduced Karina to the owner of the chiffon boutique. Million told the lady to bring out all their expensive winter clothes. She grabbed Million's arm and looked at him worryingly. But he just smiled and told her to pick as many as she liked. She stood as the seamstress took her measurements. She glanced at Million, but he was already looking at her, gazing at her with that piercing stare. She turned crimson and looked away shyly. Karina collapsed on the sofa, exhausted. She never knew taking measurements could be so taxing. The boutique owner invited her to choose from a selection of tailored clothes. Before she could move, Million put his hand on her forehead, concern reflecting in his eyes. She leaned in, comforted by his cool hand. She startled, realizing what she'd done. "My apologies," she said with burning cheeks, but he only asked if she had a fever. She said no, mortified once again over her actions. He smirked when he realized why she was so flustered. Million asked her what clothes she liked, but she said absent-mindedly, all of them. As they left the boutique, Million questioned Karina about her silence, and she pouted as she told him she didn't need that many. He'd bought all the clothes she liked. He told her to just think of it as an apology for his blunder at showing Duke Caros her paintings. As much as she complained, she liked receiving such warmth and attention from Million. How could she express her gratitude? He suddenly asked her if she was okay, and she answered with a flustered yes at how close he was. As he spoke, all Karina could do was focus on his hands. What would it feel like to hold his hand? She hesitantly grabbed his hand, but he only gave her a smile of encouragement and continued on. They headed to a nearby art store. Million felt disappointed when Karina let go of his hand. He wanted to hold her hand longer. They entered and asked for some supplies, but the owner said with a haughty tone that his art tools were not of high quality for a lady such as herself. Million grew irritated, but she told the owner she only needed some paints and a flat brush. He asked to see her hands, noting her calloused skin, and apologized for his rude behavior. He'd thought of Karina as a snobbish noble lady who only painted as a passing fancy. She ran around excited at all the paints she saw. The owner apologized to Million for having offended his lover, but Million told him they didn't have that sort of relationship. He also suggested Million make an atelier for Karina, and he agreed. Million questioned him about his knowledge on painting because of the way he examined Karina's hands earlier. The man told him that he recognized Karina painted from personal experience. He painted once as well. But that was before he almost lost his arm to artist's disease. Before they could continue, Karina came in a rush. She had in her arms what she needed, which wasn't much. He told her he'd make an atelier for her, but she insisted she wouldn't need it. Before she could continue, blood oozed from her lips. What was happening? She violently coughed as more spurted from her mouth. Million shouted out her name in horror as she fell to the floor.